All right, so let's start. Yesterday we work on a design, and that design there use flex property, and it looks like I was doing some magic stuff, but no magic there. It's just CSS property doing its work there. So let me firstly target this flex container first and give it a background color so that we can, so the background color is going to be red for the flex container here. But if you look at it, this color is not touching the red, right? The color is not touching the edge of the browser. If you look at it, the color is not touching the edge of the browser. And the reason why it's not touching the edge of the browser is because the browser is applying some default setting on some of these elements. Look at this button too. You see that there is space beside all this text. There is space at the top too, and there is space down here, and there is space on the left. What the browser is doing here is applying some default padding on this button, and is applying some default margin on the body. So in order for this thing to be removed, all this unnecessary style or all this unnecessary margin and padding that the browser is applying by default, if you don't want them, you can call all the elements that you have on the page and remove all this type. But how do you call all the elements on the page? You can't just be mentioning their name. You can't just be saying HTML, comma, H1, H2, H3. There's a lot of them. You can't just be mentioning all of them like this. How do you target everything on the page? That's where we have this asterisk, which is the universal selector. And universal selector is going to select whatever element you have on the screen, starting from the HTML downward. So, and this universal selector now, I can quickly use it to remove any setting that I don't want that the browser is applying on my element. And one of it is this margin, which is the reason why the red color is not touching the edge of the browser, because the browser is applying a margin. It's the same thing too. If I use like H1 on the page, you see that there's going to be some space and the paragraph too. The browser is applying some of this margin there. So how to work with flex properties like this. So if I save it, you see that there's going to be space in between this text and the content down here. And again too, all the text are not touching the edge of the browser. It's because of this silly setting that the browser is applying there. How to work with flex properties in the CSS explanatory class like this. So save the code, and once the code is saved, as you can see, there is some space going on there on the page. So we have space here from this top upward here. So why do we have this space? It's because of this H1. H1 is having a margin top, and at the same time H1 is having margin bottom. The same thing for this paragraph too. It's having margin top and it's having margin bottom, which is something you don't want by default. You want to apply it to any side you want, not that the browser should be doing it for all the P or all the heading text that we have on the page. So in order for you to remove all these settings without talking to each one of the element, we can now talk to them using this asterisk, which is universal selector, and now we can turn our margin to 0, and at the same time, if you don't need padding too, you turn it to 0. And as you can see, all the space that the browser is using by default has been removed on all these elements that is having it by default. The same way too, if I don't want any space in the box here, I can just use my P0 too. So anywhere there is padding by default, it will be removed. And as you can see inside this button now, there is nothing like padding there. So, and the other one that I have here is this box sizing, which is a way of talking to the browser how it's going to calculate the padding and the weight on your element. By default, what is there is content box. So which means whatever width that you are giving to your element is always going to be based on the content that is inside that box. It doesn't give it it doesn't take the account of the padding left and the padding right are there. But most of the time, you don't want this thing to be calculating nonsense for you. You want it to include all the box together, not just the content that is inside the box. You want it to include the box itself in the calculation. And in order for you to do that, you need to use border box. What is here before is content. So which means anytime you are sizing your box, it only focus on the content that is inside it. It doesn't care about the box itself. But in order for this thing to care about the box too, along with the content, you need to use this box sizing of border box. This thing can cause problem later on when you are dealing with the sizing. So when you want things to be side by side and you want it to take 50-50, when you started giving the weight and you started applying padding, it will go more than what you're expecting, because whatever weight you are creating, it's only giving it to content. It doesn't care about the box around the content. But in order for this thing to calculate everything together and make sure that if everything is in proportion, you need to use border box. And these are the basic three settings that you always do that the browser is not doing for you by default, because some of the elements, they have margin, some of them have padding, and the box sizing is not border box here, it is content box. So you need to reset these three settings so that anytime you need any one of them, it will only work at that particular side, not that it will just be applying it on any other area that you don't need this setting there. But the major thing for today is this flex property, because that's what we want to focus on. How do we use flex property? And this flex property, just like what I mentioned yesterday, is what you can use to lay your item in horizontal form or in a vertical form there. So this property, you can use it to lay out the items that is inside a box in a vertical direction on or horizontal one there. For example here, assuming we have a box, and inside this box here, you want to lay out the content inside it. So inside this box, you want to lay out the content, but the way you want the content to be laid out is that you want them to be placed side by side like this. And this is what we refer to as a flex direction of row. So when you're arranging item in a row, it means you are putting them side by side in this horizontal form. So all the items are going to be in horizontal form. So it doesn't care whether it's going outside of that parent or not. It will always put all of them on one line like this. And this is what we call flex direction of row. Apart from row, we have the other one, which is column. Apart from row, we have the other one, which is column. So instead of this one to be placing them side by side, it's going to stack them on top of each other. So this is what we call flex direction of column. So whatever items you have inside that container, it will place them on top of each other like this. So for the row, where's my eraser? So for the row, it's going to place them side by side. Let me draw that one again properly. There is it. So for the row, everything is going to be stacked in this form. This is what we call row. So everything is going to be stacked side by side. So this is flex in action here. So with flex property, you can lay your items like this, or you can lay your items like this. But you might be wondering, how do I do both of them together? That's another property that will help you to do that, which is the one that will allow you to do both the row and the column together at the same time. That's where the grid comes in. So grid allows you to do something like this. So you have both the row and the column together. And with grid, you can even specify how you want the thing to be laid out. And as you can see here, this one is quite different from what we had before. So this one, you can use it to lay your items in both the side, that means the row and the column one. So this is what we call grid. Grid allows you to arrange your items in row and in column. But when you're talking about flex, you have two sides, but you can only work with one at a time. When you're dealing with flex, you can only work with one side at a time, even though it can help you to arrange items in this row or in this column, but you can only use one at a time. You can't use the two. So you either stick with a row, or you go with column. So anytime you're using the flex direction of column, this is how it's going to stack all the items that is inside it. And anytime you are using row, this is how it is going to stack all the items that is inside it are there like that. And that's the reason why I created this box. But when you are dealing with flex, we have something referred to as a flex container and we have flex item. But these things are very important. You must understand what we are referred to as flex container and flex items. And that's the reason why I created all these elements with these classes here. So the first one, which is the one that is grouping everything on the page, I'm calling it flex container. You can call it anything, but any element that you display as flex, that element is what we refer to as flex container. So in order for this element now to be a flex container, I need to give it a property, and the name of the property is display, and the value of that property is flex. So any element that you are giving this property along with this value, that element or that selector there will be acting as a flex container, and every direct element inside it are going to be flex items. Every direct element, please, the difference between direct and indirect element. So if you look at it here, inside this div of flex container, I have all these items that have flex. So this flex item, this flex item, so this is a flex item under this container. This div too is a flex item under this container. But all these three buttons here that have this no flex 1, no flex 2, no flex 3, they are not flex item under this flex container. Why? Because they are not direct under the one that you are displaying as flex container. How do you say an item is direct or not direct? Look at the element, the parent. So look at the child. Before you get to that child, do you pass through another element before you get here? If it is yes, that means that element is not direct. But if you don't pass through another element, then that means that element, it is direct inside that parent. And this is what I'm saying here. So let me put a line there. So we have elements, the parent element. So where is the parent element? This is the parent element here. This is the parent element here. This is the parent element here. And this is the child element that I want to look at. So this is the child element that I want to look at. So from this parent to this child, did you pass another element? Do you pass through another element before you get to it? So if you have to look at it from the parent here, if I have to look at it from the parent, let me bring out this my pencil. So if you have to look at it from this parent here, so in order for you to get to this one here, you need to pass through this div. And since you are passing through another element before you get to it, then this element is not direct under this particular parent that we are looking at. So this button is not direct under this particular element that you are looking at there. I hope you are following. Hello?
Yes, I'm following, sir.
Yeah. So if you are looking at it from here, so this is the parent and this is the child here. So do you pass from this parent now before you get to this one? Do you pass through another element? You look at it, yes, because there is a div now. Before you can get to this button from here, you have to pass through this element before you get it. Like the same thing for all of them here. All of them here, you have to pass through this div from this one to get to them. And since you are passing through another element before you get to them, then all this one, they are not direct under this particular parent. So they are not direct under this particular parent. But if you are looking at this one, so we have this container and we have this button. If you look at this one now, this one is direct under this parent because you are not passing through another element before you get to this one from the parent. This is parent. So if you want to move from here now to here, you just get it directly. You do not really pass through another element from here. So from this parent, you get to this one directly. The same thing for this one too. From this parent, you can get to this element. From this parent, you can get to this element. From this parent, you can get to this element too. And from this parent, you can get to all this one without passing through another element. But when you're talking about all this button here, you can't just come from here to here without you passing through this div here. So you can't just come from here and you say you want to enter or you want to see this button, you must pass through this div before you get there. And that's the reason why all this one here, they are not direct under this parent. If you are looking at it from this parent here, they are not direct. So any element that you are passing through another element before you get to it, it is not direct. But the one you pass through, or the one you are going to, and you do not pass through another element, then we said it is direct under that particular parent you are looking at. So if you are looking at this parent now, so if you are looking at this parent, so all this one now, they are direct under it. So all these button, they are direct here, but they are not direct under this container here. All these button here, they are direct under this div, but they are not direct under this div of flex container. They are there, they are inside, but they are not direct. The difference between you are inside and you are directly inside the element. So they are inside the element, but they are not direct inside this particular element. And any element that is not direct, you can't take them as flex item. Anything that is not direct, you can't take them as flex item. So when you're looking at all this one now, the only thing that this your container is going to treat as item is this one here, the second button that follows it, this div, without thinking about what is inside it. This is the only thing that this particular container is going to see as item. It doesn't care about what is inside it. And that's the reason why you see that I collapse everything. It will not see what is inside this div. It will only see this div only as the item, because that's the only one you are not passing through another element before you get to it from here. The same thing here too. This is another item and this is another item. And the reason why I'm explaining this thing is because of the way some of the properties of flex works. They don't work on something that is not direct under the container. Like all this one now, it will not work on them. It will only work on the parent that is holding them, because this is the one that is direct under this container. It doesn't affect any nested element. It only affects the element that is directly under the container, not the one that is nested under the item. Because when I started applying some properties now, you see that it's not touching all this one. And the reason it's not touching them, that's what I'm explaining right now, so that it doesn't look like that this thing is doing magic. It's not doing any magic. You just need to understand what is going on with the element. So anytime you have elements and you want to display that as flex and it's having a nested item, the nested item is not going to be affected. It's only going to affect the one that is directly under the one that you are displaying as flex. Any element that you display as flex, that's the element that will be acting as a container, and every direct element inside it are going to be flex items. So which means here now, if I save this content, you'll see that everything now that is inside it that is a flex item are going to move side by side. But you might be thinking that why all these things go side by side? They are not. It's because of the way the button used to behave by default. So let me select the div. I have the flex items like that. Let me give it background color so that I can see that it's not really affecting them. It's really doing something because of the items that is there. So let me use yellow like this. So let me just save it like that. So the only thing that is seen as items is just this button here, and this div along with the other button. But let me comment this one out for now, so that we can work on all this one that is simple first before we start jumping into all those other ones. And let me duplicate this one multiple times, and let me change the, so this one should be 5, 6, 7, 8 like this. So anytime you are working with flex property, by default, anytime you display any container as flex.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Please, my pardon, sir. Just mute the video for now because people are complaining on the group that they...
So welcome guys. Yesterday, we worked on a design, and that design there, I talked about the flex property, but I have to rush in order to finish a lot of things there. So today is going to be based on a flex property. I need to explain what is flex property, because you are going to be using it a lot. And since it's something that you are going to be using a lot, you need to understand how to work with the flex property. And flex property, Flex property allows you to place items inside it in horizontal form or in a vertical form. For example, here now we have these two containers. So we have these two containers, and inside this container you can place item inside it in this form, which is what we call row. So you can stack your items side by side like this, and when you are doing something like this is what we call row direction. So anytime you are stacking items side by side like this, we divide it to as a row. Coming, someone wants to enter. Let me pause. Yeah, let me continue. So when you are dealing with flex allows you to stack any content that is inside it side by side like this, or it allows you to stack items in this form, which is what we refer to as column. So when you are stacking items inside a container in this form, we call it column direction. And when you are doing it in this form, the one on the left, we call it row. So this is a row direction, and this one on the other side is what we refer to as so this is the row, and here this is what we call the column direction. So with flex, you can stack your items, or you can stack your content side by side like this by using the row direction using this flex property, or you can stack content on top of each other like this using the column direction. But before you guys join, I was talking about what is flex container and what is flex items, because before you can start applying some of this flex property, you need to understand what is a container, and you need to understand what is items. And what do we refer to as container? Container is any element that you are given this property, which is this display, and the value is flex. Any element that you are displaying as flex, that element there is what we refer to as flex container. And that's why I gave it this class. The class doesn't matter. You can give it anything you want. You can give it X, you can give it Y. But any element that you are selecting on this page in your CSS and you are displaying it as flex, that element is what we refer to as flex container. And every item that is inside it, like any element that is directly inside that container, is what we refer to as flex items. So like all this button here now, they are flex items inside this div, because I'm displaying this div as flex, because from the CSS I'm targeting the element through the class and I'm displaying it as this flex. And any element that you are giving this property along with this value, that element, we call it a flex container. And every item that is inside it, which is the element that is directly inside it, we call them flex items. So all these button here, they are flex items. It doesn't need to be button, it can be anything. I'm just using button for now to explain. It can be any element, but every element that is inside it that is directly there, it is what we call them flex item. And anyone that is not direct, they are not flex item. And that's the reason why this one is commented out here. So if you look at it here, since I'm displaying this div as a flex, this button down here, all of them, they are flex item. But all these button that is inside this div, they are not flex item. The reason why they are not flex item is because they are not direct under the div that are displayed as flex. Any element that you display as flex, and whatever that is inside it, if it's not direct inside it, then it's not part of the item. The only one that is item here is this div. Whatever that is inside this div is not part of the item of this flex container. In order for all this one to turn to item, it means this div here is what you are displaying as flex. So if you display this one as flex, then all this one will turn to item. But if you are not displaying this flex, if you are not displaying this div as flex, then all this item that is inside it will not have all these things in them like that. So any items that you, or any elements that you display as flex, whatever that is inside it that is direct is what is going to be treated as item. So all this one here, they are not item. And why are they not item? Is because of the way the elements are arranged. So how do you know what is items, what is not item? look at the one that you display as flex. This is what we will display as flex. Look at the element that you want to check whether it is items or not. This is it here. So is it this item here? Are you passing through another element from this parent before you get to it? If it is yes, it is not items. If it is no, then it is item. So from this parent now, are we going to pass through another element before you get to this button? Yes, because before you can get to this button here, you have to pass through this div, because these three buttons here, they are inside this div, and since all of them are inside this div and they are not inside this one directly, then it means they are not items. So which means whatever you are doing from here to affect all these items later on, it will not affect these three buttons because they are not items under this container. So in order for them to be treated as item, it means their parent is the one that is being displayed as flex, not their grandparent. You can't be talking from the grandparent to the grandchild and it will treat them. No, it will never work on them. It's always in between immediate parent, not the grandparent. Flex doesn't work with the grandchild. It only work with the immediate child there. So in order for all this one to be treated as a flex item, they must be under this one directly. The one you're actually displaying as flex, they must be under it directly. Directly means that you are not passing through another element before you get to them. That's what we call direct. So any element that is direct inside its parent, it means you are not passing through another. So this is all these three buttons now. This is the parent. Do you pass through another element before you get to them? No. From this parent, it is no. So that means the three of them, they are directly under this div. But these three buttons here, they are not direct under this div here, because before you can get to them from here to this place, you must pass through this div. You must enter this div first before you can see them. And since you are entering another element before you see them, then they are not direct. Even though they are inside it, they are not direct. And anything that is not direct, you can't treat it as items. And when you start applying some of this div, all this flex property that I will be explaining later on, it will not affect all these three buttons. It will not affect them because they are not direct. So, but for now, I will just comment them out and explain some of the flex property that you need. And anytime you get to the time that you'll be placing a lot of elements inside each other, just notice that the one that is not direct under that parent, you can't treat it as a flex item because it doesn't go down or it doesn't go deeper into its element there. It only work on the one that is under it. That means the element you are not passing through another element before you get into it there. So you need to understand these two things: flex container and flex item. Flex item, those are the element that is inside any element that is displayed as flex. And whatever element you display as flex, that element is what we call flex container. And any flex container can act as items to other flex container. You are going to be seeing on this one when we are dealing with their advanced layout. But for now, just know that we have flex container and we have flex items. Flex item, those are the element that is inside another element that is displayed as flex. And the container one is the one that have this property. Any element that you select from CSS and is having this property here along with this value, we call that element flex container. And whatever element that is inside it, they are referred to as flex item. And anytime you are working with flex, by default, the direction that is used to use is this row here, because you can actually change from this direction to this direction, or from this direction here to this other direction, because you can change the direction, but you cannot use both of them at the same time. With flex, you can only work with one direction. Is that you're in row or you are in column, but not both. If you want to use both of them together, that's where another property comes in, another layout comes in, which is the grid. So we are going to be talking about that one too later on when we get to a design that requires that grid layout. But for now, we only want to work on a design that will base on row or column, but not both of them at the same time. And this is what you'll be using a lot. You're always going to be using this flex property a lot, because it allows you to do a lot of things that you can't just be talking to all the elements one by one. Just group them together and talk to the parent, then the parent will talk to all the items that is inside it, and it will do all the necessary stuff that you're expecting it to do there. But when you're working with flex, you can only work with this direction here, but one at a time. You can't work with the two of them. So either you are in row or you are in column. And as you can see here, anytime you display any element as flex, by default, all items are going to be in row direction. So anytime you display uh, any element as flex, all the items are going to have this row direction, and that's the reason why you see that all these number, they are placed side by side. But you can actually change the direction if you don't want the current direction that is giving you there. The current direction you always have there, or the default direction, is always row, and you know that row will always stack all the items side by side like this. You need to place all of them side by side, but you can actually change the direction to this column, or you can even reverse any one of them. Reverse means that the start will be the end and the end will be the start. But for now, it always start from the left, but you can actually change it to start from the right, and that's why you start doing the reverse. But sometimes you need to do reverse there based on design you'll be seeing later on. So anytime you display any element as flex, it's going to place all its items side by side, but you can actually change the direction. So how do you change the direction? We have a property known as flex direction, and as you can see here, there are different directions that you can use. So we have the column, we have this column reverse, we have row, we have this row reverse. So which means you can reverse the column and you can reverse the row. But what is there by default is row. When you don't specify any direction, this is what is going to show for you by default. And as you can see, nothing is changing there. But I can actually change it to column. And don't forget, anytime you are dealing with column, it's going to stack all your items on top of each other. Can you see now? So when you're dealing with the column, it will stack all the items on top of each other. So this is the column, and for the row, it's going to place them side by side. So the row will place all the items side by side from left to right, or if you want, you can place them side by side from right to left. So if I reverse the row now, you see that it's going to change the stuff. Can you see now? This is the reverse. It's still row, but it will reverse the stuff. So where it starts before we turn to end, and where it's end, we turn to start. Because sometimes you need something like this. So you need something like this. It will reverse it. As you can see, the 1 is now the end, the 8 is now the first. But if it is row, which is the default one that is there, everything will just start the way you arrange it in your HTML. So this is the first one, the second one, and so forth like that. The same thing with the column too, which is what you can use to stack the content on top of each other. It doesn't care whether that thing is inline before or is not inline. It will stack them on top of each other. So as you can see, starting from the first one all the way to the last one, based on the way it is arranged in the HTML. But you can actually reverse this one too. So instead of you doing column, you can do column reverse. So which means what is start will go to the end, and what is end will be the start. That's the reverse. I'm wondering, why do I need this thing? Like sometimes you need something like this that you need to reverse, because on desktop, the way the thing is positioned is quite different from the way it is on the mobile. But you don't want to change the HTML. It's still the same HTML you're using, but you want to change their position. How do you do it? You can use this flex now to switch the first to the last, and the last to the first items are there like this. So this is one of the flex property. This is one of the flex property. And why did I call it flex property? This one will not work until you display as flex. Any of the flex property that I will be explaining, they are not going to work until you have this display of flex. So if I disable this one now, it will not work at all. As you can see, nothing like a flex direction. Before this flex direction can work, you must display as a flex first. You can't just use flex direction without you displaying as flex. If you don't display your element as flex, it will not work. And some other flex property that I will be showing you there, they will not work until you display as flex. So before you can start using any flex property, you must first display as flex. Then that's where all this one will now start working. If you don't display as flex, it's not going to work at all. I hope you guys are following before I move to the next property. Hello?
Yes, sir.
So
yes, sir.
before you can change any direction, you need to have the display of flex. And once you have the display of flex, then you can change the direction. And if you don't want to change the direction, which means everything is just placed side by side, you don't even need to call this one at all, because that's what it's going to give you by default. But if you now want to stack or reverse the row or the column, then you need to call this flex direction to change it there like that. Another thing that we have there is gap, which is very important. Once I display as flex here, you see that there is no space in between all these items again. There is no space. Before the display of flex, there's actually a space there that this thing is using by default. As you can see, the space is there like that. But once you display as flex, any space that is in between all the items there is going to remove all of them. Even when it is in column 2, you see that there is no space in between all these items. So how do you give them space? You might be thinking, okay, let me just select each one of them and give them margin bottom. Okay, let me just select flex item, then use margin bottom for every one of them. So margin bottom, because I want to place the spacing at the bottom part of each one of them. What's wrong with this thing? So now if I use one area here, you see that it's going to do it by placing one area at the bottom of every. But now it's doing it for the last one too, which is not what I want. I only want this space to be in between all of them without adding it to the cost. If you look at it, it's not at the top here, so I don't need down here too. And this one, now doing it yourself is just waste of time, because you can do the same thing from the flex container. Don't forget, we have flex container and we have flex item. So anytime you display your flex container as flex, you can actually apply some property on all these items from the container without you talking to the items directly. So you can talk to all these items from the parent. But in order for it to work, you need to have items inside it. And what is item? They are the direct element that is inside that container. So direct element, those are the one is going to treat as item. And any of this property now will only affect the item. It doesn't affect any other content again. And this is it here. Let me activate this particular stuff so that you see what I'm talking about. So if I activate this one here, and if I save it, you see that all these three buttons down here, can you see? Can you see that they are not stacked on top of each other? The reason why they are not stacked is because this container is not seeing them as item. And anything that is not seen as item there is not going to apply whatever you are doing on this container. Look at it here. If it is row, to you, you might be thinking it's actually placing all of them side by side, but it's not doing it. As you can see that the way all this one are there is quite different from all this one here. There is space in all this one because it's not affecting them. So the same thing too, if you change it to column, it's only the items that is inside it is going to affect. Anything that is not item, it will not touch them, even though they are part of the contents of that container. It doesn't touch anything that is not items. How are you going to know that this thing is not item? When you are passing through another element before you get to whatever you are looking for, then all those ones are not items. And all this one now, they are not items under this container because you are passing through another element here before you get to them. But any one of them that you are not passing through another element, then it's going to treat them as an item. So let me disable this one back so that we can talk about other properties that the flex used to give you there that you can use to arrange all the items that you have inside it. But anything that is not item, it will not touch it. The container will not touch anything that is not item inside it. It will only focus on the item. And as you can see from the example here, see that everything that is inside this div is not touching them because they are not directly under this flex container. But if I move all of them outside of this div, now they are items now. So if I save it, you see that it will arrange them because it's not seeing them as item. Look at it, it's not seeing them as item. But if they are inside another element, it will not see them as item. It will not, and if it's not seeing them as item, it will not do anything with them. Whatever it's doing with its item, it will not affect anything that is not item under it there. So you should know what is item and what is not item, so that when you are using this thing later on, you don't blame CSS that it's not doing what you are expecting it to do. It's because it doesn't work with anything that is inside it that is not items there like that. So another property that we have here is gap, and this is what you can use to do what I did here with this margin. So with this gap, you can apply space in between all these items here. Gap is what we used to use to force a space inside or in between all these items. So gap is used to force a space in between all the items that you have in the container. Look at it. I'm applying the stuff from the container, but it's going to affect all the items. That's how flex work. Whatever you are doing with the container, it's always going to apply it on the item, not on the container itself. Whatever you are doing on the container with flex, it will affect all the items. It will affect all the items. So which means this direction here, as you can see, is not only affecting the first item, it's affecting all of them. Whatever you are doing with the container, it's always going to affect the item. You are not really affecting the container, you are affecting the items that is inside it. So here now, if I give it a gap, maybe around that 1 rem, which is 16 pixels, what I'm saying here is that in between all the items, I want to force a space, and the space there is going to be this 1 rem. And if I save it here, as you can see, it's going to force a space in between, not at the edge or at the end of it. So there won't be any space at the edge here, and there won't be any space at the edge here too, because the space is always going to be in between all the items, not at the end or at the start of the first and the last item there. So it's always going to be in between all the items. So gap is what you use to force a space. Just look at what I mentioned now. This is what I just said here. Force a space. It force a space. So whether there is space inside parent or there is no space inside the parent, it's going to find that space for you. So anytime you're using gap, by default, you won't have any space in between. Once you display as flex, you won't have any space. But if you want a space, what you can do there is to use this gap. And gap will force a space inside the items. And as you can see here, there is space in between all these items. If I don't use gap, you see that there won't be any space in between all these items here. What's wrong with this thing? So yeah, look at it now. So no space in between all these items, and if you want to force a space, then you can use gap. So gap is used to force a space when there is no space in between all the items. But at some time inside the parent, we have some excess space. Look at it here. These are the items in a row form. We have this excess space. If it is in a column form, you won't even see any space at all, because they will have covered up the entire stuff. So in this side, there is no space. But when you are working with the row, based on the number of content you have inside it, there is some time you are going to have excess space. Look at this. All this red area now, there are space that is useless. But how do we distribute this space in between all these items? That's where these two property comes in. So anytime you have space inside the flex container and you want to distribute that space in between all these items, you can use these two properties that will be explaining next. But all these two properties too, these two properties have some little stuff with them that I need to explain too, because of the way they apply their action based on whether you are working on row or you are working on the column direction. So when you are working with flex and you have space left inside this parent, you can actually distribute this space. So let me increase the height so that you can see both the. So let me increase the height, should be 300 pixels like this. So you see something happening here. Can you see what is happening? Look at what is happening to all this button. I increase the height of this container. All these buttons too, they are now doing this nonsense here. What are they doing here is because there are two properties here that is going on with all these items that you can control to from the parent. And anytime you are controlling this thing from the parent, it will affect all the items that is inside it. Because sometimes this is not how you want your button to behave or the item to behave. Because anytime you increase the parent height, it will always increase the items that is inside it. If I remove the display of flex, it will not, can you see? It will not work like that. This is how the button is supposed to be. But because we display as flex, there are some properties here that is doing this stuff behind the scene. And you can actually remove what is doing by changing it to something else that you want. Most of the time, this is what you want, and sometimes this is not what you want. You actually want to move all this content around inside this container. But anytime you want to move all these items around, you need to understand what we refer to as main axis and the secondary axis here. So we have the main axis and we have the secondary axis, or what you can call this vertical and this horizontal here. So, and these two properties are this that we are going to be using. The two properties that we are going to be using, we have this one, justify content, which is what I used yesterday, and at the same time we have this align items. So we have align items and we have justify content. But these two, they are working for these two sides, but the way they are working is depending on whether you are dealing with the flex direction of row or flex direction of column. And when you are working with the flex direction of row, this is how it works. When you are working with the flex direction of row, this justify is working for the horizontal, while this align is working for this vertical. So this, when you are working with the row direction, justify content will be moving all the items on the horizontal axis, while the align items will be moving your content on the vertical axis. This is how it works when you are dealing with the row direction. But if you are dealing with the column direction, this thing is going to switch. So when you are dealing with the column direction, this is how it's going to work. Let me draw another line for that. So when you are working with the column direction, this is how it works. When you are working with this column direction, this is how it works. So when you are working with the column direction, justify will be working for this vertical, while align will be working for this horizontal. Please let me put the text there so that this thing is going to. So when you are working with the row direction, when you are working with the row, so this one is for the row. Where's my pen? So when you are working with the row, so when you are working with the row, this is how it works. And when you are working with the column direction, this is how it works. So when you are working with the row, justify is talking about horizontal, while align is talking about vertical movement of the items. Justify is talking about the movement on the horizontal axis, while align is talking about vertical movement when you are dealing with the row direction. But when you are dealing with the column direction, justify is talking about vertical, while align is talking about horizontal. Hello? I hope you guys are following.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So when you are working with the flex direction of row, this justify is talking about how you are moving all the contents on the horizontal axis, while align is talking about how you are moving them on the vertical axis. But once you change the direction now to column, then it will switch to. The two will switch their place. So which means here now, justify will be vertical and align will be horizontal. Please, when you are working with the row, justify is horizontal, align is vertical. But when you are working with the column, justify is vertical and align is horizontal. So because I will be using them now, and once I'm using them, you should know what this thing is going to do based on whether I'm working with the row or I'm working with the column direction. So by default, your direction is always row, which means justify is horizontal, align is vertical. But once you change the direction, then your justify will be vertical and align will be horizontal. So I want to remove this thing now so that I can use them and you see it in action. So then let me disable this one. And these are the value that you can use for them, but you should know the side they are going to work. So for this justify content now, since our direction is row, it means it's going to be moving all this content from the left to the right or from the right to the left, because that's horizontal. But if it is aligned, then it will either move it from the top to the bottom to the center or to the bottom side here. This is what this justify is doing. Justify by default is putting everything to the start, and this is what we call flex start. Flex start means that on the horizontal side, everything is going to stick to the left. That's what we call start. But there is some time you want to move all of them to the end, so you can actually use flex end. Look at what is happening. Don't forget, whatever you are doing from this container is going to affect the items, not the parent itself. It's going to affect all the items that is inside, all of them, not just the first one or the second one or the third one. If you want to do it for any one of them, there is way of doing that one. You have to talk to each one of them separately. But for today, we won't be working on that. So we want to move all of them at once. Anytime you are dealing with anything from flex container, it will always talk to all the items, not just the first one, the second one, or the last one, depending on the number of items you have inside it. So justify content is talking about how you are moving it, all the items on the horizontal axis if you are dealing with row. But if you are dealing with column, you see that the way it's going to work on it now is different. If I save it, and now can you see the way it's now working? It's not horizontal again, it's now vertical, because justifying is now talking about vertical when the column when the direction is column, but when the direction is row, then it's talking about horizontal. As you can see, please, the way this thing used to work is depending on the direction that you are working with. If you are working with the row, your justified is kind of dealing with left to right, but if it is column, it's dealing with the top to this bottom here, and the same thing for that align too. But the property you be giving justify is what you be giving align. The difference between them is where they are using it. That's just the difference. Whatever property I'm using for this justify content, that's the same property you'll be using for align. The difference is just where they are using it. So justify is doing it for the horizontal when your direction is row, and align will be doing it for the vertical. But when the direction is column, justify is vertical and align is horizontal. So instead of me moving it to the edge, I can actually move them to the center. So everything is going to be at the center instead of it to be at the edge or inside, as you can see. And this is what you can quickly use to move things that is inside a parent to the center automatically. So instead of me moving them one by one, I can just talk to the parent and it's going to move all of them to the center, no matter the size of your browser. Then it will always calculate everything automatically for you. So whether the browser is width is small or it is wide, it will recalculate everything for you automatically, and it will position everything to center. But don't forget, if I change the direction from this row now to column, you see that it will switch it. It's not going to be vertical, not horizontal again. So when the flex direction is column, justify is talking about vertical, and when it is row, then it is talking about horizontal. So you can see now that the way it's doing it is different, even though it's the same value, but the way it's doing it is different based on the direction that you are working with. So if it is column, it will be doing it vertically, but if it is a row, then it will use the horizontal axis to work on it. So, and these are the different values that you can use. We have flex start, which is what is using by default. So everything are going to stick to the left side. We have the flex end, everything are going to stick to the right side. Again, to this one is depending on whether you are reversing it or you are not reversing it. Because if you reverse it, this is going to be start and here is going to be end. But for now, we don't care about the reverse. When we get to the design that needs that, it will just be small thing to explain there. So I won't be explaining too much. But this is the end by default, and this is going to be start, or you can use center, which is what you are going to use to move all the items to the center. But if you look at it, it's still not using all this space. So you can actually use the other property too to distribute the space in between all these items. And one of them is this space between. So we have a property here that you can use to distribute all the space that is left inside the parent. Please, all these three property here, they are working based on whether there is space left in the parent or not. If there is no space left, you won't see any effect with them. But if there is space, then you see the stuff they are doing there to your items. So here we have space around. Space around is going to distribute whatever space that is inside your parent or whatever that is inside the parent of the container, and it's going to put it around everything. But what you need to notice here about the space around, even though I don't really use it like that because it doesn't give what I want to do. The one I used to use is space between, because that one I can control the space at the edge, then it's going to control the space in between all the items. But here, this one will control the space at the edge and it will still control the space in between the item, which is not what I want, because now if I increase the browser, it will increase the spacing too. But I don't want the spacing at the edge to be changing anyhow like this. I want to be the one that will set it, but it can change anything that is in between them and that's the reason why this one is always useless to me, or almost all the design you be working on. This one here is always useless because you don't want this one to be controlling the edge for you. You want to be the one that will be doing it using your padding to do it. But doing it for you like this, if the browser is increasing there, it will keep increasing the spaces, because the way this thing works is that it's depending on the space that is left in the parent. Based on that space, it will distribute it. But what is there is that the one at the edge will always be smaller compared to the one in between all the items there. But if you want the thing to be equally, so you can use space evenly. So space evenly is going to distribute all the space that is left in the parent equally. So the one at the edge is what you are going to have inside. I don't use this one too like that, but there's some time that you need this. So there's some time you need this, and it's going to, as you can see, the spacing at this edge is the same thing inside, and it's still the same thing at this right hand side there. So that's space evenly. But this one will only work if there is space inside the parent. So if there is space inside this parent, which is this flex container, that's the only time all this one will work. For example, now if I give it a width that is small, if there is no space, you will not see anything. You will just see that everything is just jam packed. Maybe like this, I gave it 100 pixels, and if that's it, can you see? It will not work at all. So if there is no space in the parent, you won't see anything. It doesn't force a space. This your justify content doesn't force a space. If you want to force a space, that's where gap comes in. So whether the space is there or there is no space, this gap will always force a space. As you can see, gap will always force a space. But justify or align content don't force space. If there is no space in the parent, you will not see any effect at all, because they are based on the space that is left in the parent. And if there is no space left, then you will not see anything. But if there is space, as you can see, you will see the effect of what they are, because they will distribute that space that is left inside the parent. But if there is no space at all, you won't see any effect. And as you can see here, nothing is being justified there. Even there is still a little justified there. If I remove all this thing, maybe like around that 90 pixels, you see that everything is just jam packed together because there is no space. And if you want to force a space, that's gap. Gap is what you always use when you need to force a space. But if you need to force a space and there is space left in the parent, and you want to use all those space that is left in the parent here, that's where this justify and align comes in. But don't forget, when you are using them, you need to know this is the direction they are working with. So when your direction is row, justify is working for the horizontal, and align is working for the vertical. So which means if I bring align 2 in now, and if I use flex style, don't forget you'll be using the same value. The difference is where they are working with. Can you see now? So align is working for the vertical. So now I've put everything at the top for the vertical, but on the horizontal axis, I'm using the space evenly or space between. This is the last one. Space between means that the space that is left in the parent are going to be distributed in between them, but nothing at the edge. So instead of you putting the space at the edge like this, it will remove all those space and just distribute everything inside each of the items there. So if I save it, come in. So if I save it down and take everything back to the way it is, you'll see that we will not have any kind of spacing inside the stuff like that. Why is there like one space here? Did I apply padding somewhere? No. So this is going to be at the edge. You are not going to have any spacing at all there. So justify content is working with the horizontal axis. Align items is working with the vertical when your direction is row. But when your direction is colon, they will switch their axis there. So if I save it now, as you can see that the way it's working is different now because I've already switched the place. So justify is now working for the vertical, align is now working for the horizontal. But if I return it back to row, then justify will be horizontal, where align will be vertical. And the one that this thing is using before, that you see that is covering the entire space, is this stretch. So if I save it, it will look like the way it is before. Stretch means that whatever item that is inside this parent, it must stretch all of them so that they cover up the height of its parent. So whatever the parent is using as the height, it must stretch all of them in that vertical direction, and it must cover up the entire stuff. But instead of you using this one, you can use center. So which means vertically it's going to move everything to the center. But on the horizontal axis, everything is going to be space between. And if you want both of them to be center center, then you can now give it like this. So which means on the horizontal, it will be center, vertical, it will be center. And as you can see, everything is now perfectly center in the container are there like that. No matter the size of the container, it will always go to the center and place it both vertically and on the horizontal axis here. So I hope you guys are following. And if you want to if you want to force a space, because if you look at it now, there is no space. So if you want to force that space, you can now use gap, and it's going to put the space there. Any question? Any question? Hello?
No questions, sir. No questions.
So, and this is what all these sites that you are seeing here are using. For example, now let me go to this side. Can you see this side? You see that there is content by this side and there is image by this side. This is the work of Flex here. It's Flex that you can use to do this. What they are doing here, so what they are doing here is this. So we have a container, which is the Flex container. So there's a Flex container here that cover up everything here. But inside the container, they have two items. The first item is what is holding all this content, and the second item is the one that is holding this image. So when you now display it as Flex now, don't forget, Flex doesn't affect anything that is not directly under it, because all this one now, there are items that is inside this on the left side. So, and since they are not part of the items, it will not affect them at all. So they will just be under this container directly. It's only this container and this one that is going to place side by side. The same thing is what they are using at the top here. So inside this side, you see this is a container, and inside this container, there is logo there. And again, there's another container here that holds all this one. But if you look at this, all this one that moved to this side and the logo is on the left. How do you do something like this? Is this flex property that you are going to use to achieve this design? And let us do that. Let us quickly put that in practice. So let us quickly see how you can do something like it, because it's cheap. It's just CSS along with this flex property. So let me quickly create the header. So let me create something like that, but it's just a simple header. So let me quickly create a simple header. So I'm going to use this header tag. Inside the header tag, I'm going to have this A, which I'm going to use just put a text for logo. But apart from this A, I'm going to have a nav. And inside this nav, that's where I'm going to have all the A for the navigation. So here we have challenges. We have this, what's going on? We have solutions. After this solution, we have pricing. After this one, we have, what do we have here? What can I put here? So about, and lastly, we have contact us. So let me save and let us go back to our page. This is what we want to do. What we want to do by the time we apply our flex is that I want the logo to be by this side and every other content to be by this right hand side here. So how are we going to achieve this thing? We can actually do it with the help of this flex property and all this justify and this align content that I just mentioned now. So let me select that one. So we have this header. So we have the header, which is the one. So look at it, please. Look at what I just did now. The only item, if I display this header now as flex, the only thing that is going to be seen as item is just this A and this nav. It will not see everything that is inside nav as items. Don't forget, all this A here, they are not direct under this header. Why are they not direct? Is because you need to pass through this nav before you get to them from this header. From header, before you get to all this A, you must pass through the nav. And since you are passing through this nav, it means all these A, they are not direct under this header. And anytime you display this header as flex, it will only see only this nav and this A that I put logo here. It will not see anything that is inside the nav. So in order for everything that is inside the nav to be flex item, it means here you are displaying your nav as flex. So they can only be flex item under nav. They can't be flex item under header because they are not directly under the header. So which means once I display this one now as flex, anytime I'm applying any flex property there, it will only be affecting this and the nav, not what is inside the nav. So it will only be moving nav, but since the other items are inside the nav, it will look as if it's moving them too. It's not really moving them, it's only moving the nav. But since other items are inside the nav, they will now follow suit. But any of the CSS any of the flex property from header will not affect anything that is inside nav. It will only affect nav, not what is inside the nav. And that's what you can do, or that's what you can use to do what we have on this site here to achieve this thing. That you have the logo by the left and you have every other content on the right hand side. And this is how it used to work. Anytime you have two flex items in its parent there, let me do it with this one so that you see it, how it works. So let me apply it here first before I now apply it on this header. So let me even change this one back to space between. So space between is what you can use to achieve what the site is doing there. Because what space between used to do is that it will place one on the left and it will move the other one to the right if there are two items. So if there are two items in the parent, the first one will be on the left and the second one will be on the right. But if it is more than two, if it is three, the first one will be on the left, the second one will be at the middle, the last one will be the third one. But because this one is more than yeah, that's why it looks like they are like this. So let me just remove the other one and only leave two items so that you see how this thing used to move when you have only two or when you have only three and so forth like that. So if I disable all this one, you see how two is going to work. So once you are using this one, the first one will be on the left when you are using space between, and the second one is going to be on the right hand side here. So look at it. Anytime you have two items inside a container and you are justifying the content space between and your direction is row, the first one will be on the left and the last one will be on the right. And that's what this site is using here. That's why you see that the logo is here and the other content are by the right hand side. What this container is seeing is just two items. It's not seeing all this learning part. It's not seeing all these challenges because they are grouped. And that group is what is going to be moving, not each items that you have there. If you put them as items, it will be doing something else. Because now if I go back to my page and if I give two items, maybe if I duplicate this one now, you see, let me just move this button, the third one. Let me just move it outside of it. So you see that now the way it's going to do is that when there are three and you are using justify content space between for the row direction, the first one will be on the left, the second one will be at the center, and the third one will be on the right. And that's what I'm using for this site here. That's what I'm using for this site. Look at it. The logo is this side. All this one are the center, and all this one are by the right hand side. This is flex working here with a justify content of space between. This one now, they are not standing alone. That's all of them are at the center. They are grouped. Because if you are not grouping them, it will be seeing them as items. So in order for it not to see them as items, you need to group them using any of the grouping tags that I've talked about. So here now, this one is by this side, this one is at the center, and this one is here. And the reason they are moving together like this because they are being grouped. So it's that group that is going to see, it will not see what is inside the group. The same thing here too. So if it is two, one will be on the left and one will be on the right. If it is three, the first one will be here, the second one will be at the center, and the third one will be by the right. If it is four, the first one will be here, the second and the third one will be at the center, and the last one will be at the end. And that's how it's going to be separating them depending on the number of the content you have inside it. So if I move the fourth one outside too, you see that the second and the third one will be at the center, while the first one and the last one will be at the edge. And if I activate the other one too, that's how it will be shifting them until there is no space left inside the period. As you can see, the first one and the last one will always be at the edge, but the other one will be at the center, and there won't be any space at the edge. That's what we'll revert to as this space between. But don't forget, space between or space evenly or that other one, space let me see. So as you can see, space around, space between, space evenly, or flex start, center, flex end here, all of them will only work when there is space left in the parent. If there is no space, you will not see any effect at all. And we can now use this same thing here now to create this our nav here, because we know that inside the header we only have two items, even though inside the nav there are some other element there, but they are not part of the header. Since they are not part of the header items, so it will only move the nav, it will not really touch the items that is inside it. So let me quickly do it so that you see this stuff in action there. So we have the header, we have the nav. So let me give the background color so you can see it, that this thing is actually moving only that container, is not touching what is inside it. So this one is going to have background color of yellow. The header itself is going to have padding because I want to have spacing inside it. I'm using all the property we've talked about. So the background color is still going to be this white, but now I need to give it box shadow. We talked about this one the last class. So for this box shadow, 0, 0, oh no, let me move it down by 3 pixels. The radius is going to be 15 pixels and the color is going to be black. But now I mentioned it that at the last class I said that you should reduce the opacity or the channel of this color so that it can give it a subtle design. So if I save this one now, which you have, as you can see, this is the shadow here going on, so that we can see what is going on. And I don't want it to be 100% of the entire screen. So the max width of this thing, the max width of it should be 90%. So which means whatever the width of its parent, which is the body, it's only going to take 90%. But it's going to move it to the left. The space is going to be on the left, but I want it to be at the center. What do? You use margin left and margin right auto. That's what we use to shift any element. So don't forget margin inline. I've talked about this one too, which is your margin left and right. So margin inline is just margin left and right. And once you use auto, it means the space that is left on the right. So if I go back to the page, this space that is left on the right should be distributed between this left and right. Not that it will just be on the right only. It will distribute it on both the left and the right hand side there. So if I give it as auto, you see that, as you can see, that space that is on the right is now being distributed between the left and the right so that the content can be on the center there. So another thing we talked about is the border radius, which I'm trying to create this nice header that I used to see on all these sites. So if I use like 3 rem like this, it's going to give us this round edge. So I just created this. But what do we want to do? We want the logo to be by this side, and we want all these other links to be by the right hand side. So how do you do it? You know that you need to display the container as flex, because before you can start using anything like a gap, or before you can start using anything like justify content or align item, you must display flex first. If you don't display flex, they don't work, because they work based on this. And as you can see now, the content are now being placed side by side. So if you look at it, the logo and the nav, don't forget the nav is what this thing is going to see as item, not what is inside the nav. But if you look at it, inside the parent, we have this space left there. So what do we need to do? We need to shift all this content to the right. But you might be thinking that, okay, what you need to use is just this justify content of flex end. It will not work, because when you say flex end, you are moving everything, not just the nav. As you can see, when you say flex end, it will move everything to the end. So but what you want to do is that you want the logo to stay by the left, and you want the other one to move to the other side. So instead of you using this, you need to put the space in between them. So how do you put space in between them? It's just by calling space between. And if I save it now, you see that it's going to create that kind of a header that you are seeing on that side. Look at it. We now have the logo by this side, and we have all the other content by this side. The reason why it's working like this is because of what I did here. Because I know that everything that is inside the nav will not be affected by this container here. If I did not do it like that, maybe I just put everything directly under the header, it will not work the way you'll be expecting it to work, because it might be seeing everything as items. And since it's seeing everything as items, can you see? It will put the space in between each one of them, because you see them as items now. But if you don't want it to see them as items, you need to group them together. And that's the reason why I'm grouping them using this nav. So since they are inside the nav, the header that is a flex container, we only see nav. It will not see what is inside it. And since it's not seeing what is inside it, it will move the nav to the end. And since other content are inside the nav, it will move all of them together. It's not affecting what is inside the nav. It's only affecting the nav. So if you want to do anything with everything that is inside the nav too, you have to display that one too as flex. Maybe you want to arrange all those one too the way you want. That's how you be doing. You keep putting flex anywhere you want it to have this flex property. So if I want the nav too to behave, or if I want to put a gap in between each one of them, what I can just do here is just to display this one as flex. Any flex item can act as a container to other items. So this nav now is flex item to this header, but it's going to be flex container to everything that is inside it. That's what I'm doing now. Nav is going to be flex item under header, but this nav too is still going to be container to everything that is inside it. So any items that you are giving a flex display here, whatever that is inside it too will turn to item, and this one will now talk to the container to everything that is inside, not to its own parent. Nav will be items under the header, and it's going to be container to everything that is inside it. And that's what you'll be doing. When you put one element inside another element, you keep displaying the parent as flex and you arrange them the way you want. For example, now if I want all these ones to stack on top of each other, I can actually do it. Because if I display as flex, it's going to put them side by side, but that's not what I want. I want the direction to be column. And if I save it now, you see that it's only affecting what is inside nav. It's not touching the logo because logo is not part of nav. So, and whatever you are doing with the nav, it will only affect the items that is inside it, not anything that is outside of it, because that's how flex work. It will only affect the direct element that is inside it like this. So, but this one is going to be, this is not how it's going to be. So it's going to be still a row like this, and from there I can put a gap maybe around that 1 rm, and it's always going to affect what is inside them like this. So any question guys, any question on this flex property, because we are going to be using this in the next class for this design here. We are going to be using it in the next class for this design. As you can see this design, let me go there. Let me go to the design. Let me go to this design. So look at this is grid here. This is what I'm calling grid. As you can see, this one is using both the row and the column at the same time. This is what we call grid. When you get to that part, we talk about the grid. But for today, we're only talking about flex. And as you can see, look at this content is by this side. This is another content here. By now, you know how to create your flex. Before you can start working with flex, you need to have a container. So all these items here, let me draw it properly. So all these items will be in a container. Then this is going to be the left container that hold all this content, and this is going to be the right container. So this outer one now, when you display it as flex, it will move both of them side by side. But inside this one too, you can display it as flex. You now put all of them as the direction to the column. This one, the outer one here, the direction is going to be row. But for this inner one, the direction is going to be column. And that's what you'll be doing. That's what you'll be doing. You'll be putting one element inside another one, and you use your flex to either place them side by side or you place them on top of each other. And this design here, this is not how it is on mobile. This is not how it is on mobile. If you go to the mobile side, you see that you can't place items like this side by side. You have to stack them on top of. Can you see? So on mobile, can you see that the direction is different? On mobile, this one is at the top, this one is down. But on the desktop, they are placed side by side. So flex will help you to do something like this easily without creating different elements. The same element, the only thing you just do is to change the direction based on whether you are on mobile or you are on desktop. On mobile, the direction is going to be column for the parent, while on desktop, the direction is going to be row, which is going to make your design to be, you are not changing anything. The only thing you are just changing there is just the direction based on whether you're on the mobile or you are on the desktop. And that's how things always, even this one that you are seeing here, everything that you are seeing here, this is flex here. So if you have to look at this box here, if you want to design it to yourself, it is flex that you are going to use to arrange it. So this box you are seeing, if I want to design it now, this is how I'm going to lay out the element, because you must lay out the element correctly before you start using the flex property. So this is a container. Inside the container, I can see that this is one element here, and this is another element here that is holding on this one. So once I display this outer one as flex, it will move this one by this side, and it will move this one to this side. But if you look at it, the one on the right is having more space than the one on the left. So when we get to a design like this, I will show you the property you are going to use to make sure that this side is actually more than the other side, because by default it will give you equal width, but you can actually talk to it that we want this one to have more space than the one that is on the right, or the one that is on the left should have more space than the one that is on the right, and so forth like that. But flex is what you always use a lot. Even this side sef, you can use flex, because if you look at it now, the text is on the left but the button is on the right. So how do you do all this thing? We talked about them when we get to a design that requires all this one, because the property that I mentioned today, this property that I mentioned today here, they are property that you are applying from the flex container. So you apply the property from the flex container and it's affecting the flex item. But at some time, you want to affect all the item one by one yourself. So that's where you'll be talking to each item. But for today, we only focus on the property that you apply from the container and it's affecting the item. But later on, there's some other property that you can apply from the item itself, but it will only affect that particular item that you are using it with. It will not affect any other items that is beside it. It will only affect that particular items. So any other question on this?
Sir, I want to ask that it's not the same as
You
now
said
here. It's not the same thing as
it's not the same. Oh. That's why I mentioned it here that they are not the same. When you are talking about grid, with grid you can work with the both direction at the same time. So with grid, you can work with the row
No,
and
I think
column.
Nav and
nav, no,
div.
not grid. Nav
Nav
and
and
grid, not grid. Nav and
nav.
div,
Yeah. Now I mentioned div is the general grouping element. So all of them behind the scene, they are
Okay,
just div. Just that all those nav header, they are semantic. That's why we call them semantic. They are representing a particular area on the page. Not that they really have, they are giving you any styling. They are not giving you any styling. No. You have to be the one that will style it correctly. And that is the reason why you see that this one that I use header now is not at the top. It's currently at the place that I type it. Even though I'm using header, that doesn't mean to just jump to the top of your page. No, they are just semantic tag that we use to represent different area on the page. Not that they will give you any styling. No. Behind the scene, they are just div, and you can use div in place of them instead of the div that instead of the header that I use or nav. So instead of using that nav, you can actually use div. It will still work. So it depends on your styling. I can even change it right now. Say, let me change it to div. So change it to div from css, and at the same time to change it here. So whatever you use from your html, that's what you use to style it, or you use the other selector. But that doesn't mean it will not work if you use div. So they are all grouping elements. There's a lot of them, and I'll be bringing them out where you need them. We normally use
But sir,
nav
yesterday
to
you
group
were
all the
talking about
navigation.
main.
Main is what we use to group the entire content on the page together, the major content on the page. You know, we have header, we have footer. What about the major content on the page? So that's why you need to group all those major content together. That's where the main comes in. So you can use main for that.
So sir, if main is for grouping all the, then what is div then?
That's what I'm saying now. Div is generic. You can use div anywhere. Div is generic. Div can be used anywhere.
Okay.
Div is before HTML5. HTML5 is the one that brought all this in now. All this nav, whatever stuff. What we used to use before HTML5 is just div. The only thing you have is div.
Okay.
It's not every time say you'll be using all this header, whatever stuff. Most of the thing later on, you see that what I'll be using is div, because it's not every time that you'll be working with header, you'll be working with footer of the site, or you'll be working with the main content. That's inside the main content, you are going to have different areas there. And those different areas now, what you'll be using there, look at this site now, look at this site. As you can see on this site, you can think of this white box now as the main area of the site. But if you look at it, there are different sections. This is one section, the resources section. This is the time reference section. This is the unit time start section. So you can now group each one of them in a section. But inside this section too, look at it, there's a separate group too. So you are going to be having a lot of group inside another group. So inside this group now, what you'll be using here is div, not all this thing again. And look at the top here. You can use header for this part, this color that you have at the top here. You can use header, and you can use it where you have this copyright here. Then you can use footer for this particular area here. So this is what you use footer to group the bottom part of the site. Then you use header to group the top part of the site together. Then here, this is the major content. Everything together here, they are inside main. But inside the main too, there are different sections. There is section for this unit times time. Yeah. There is a section for the time reference. As you can see that each one of them, they are boxed on their own and they are not joined together. So you can even use div to group all these things. And again too, inside these resources, look at it. This is one section, this is another area there, this is another one, and this is another one. But how do you place them side by side? Don't forget, this is where your flex comes in, which is the same thing here. Look at it. There's content on the left, there's another one on the right. This is flex going on here. It's flex you can use to do this thing. Yeah. The same thing with all this content you have here, times time, the content. This one here, this one here. This is the application of flex that we just talked about today. And we're going to be applying them on all this design that we'll be picking from here. Any question there?
No question.
The same thing here to look at the design. You see that there's some content on this left and we have this image on the right. This is flex here. Once you display, this is a container. This is a container. This is how it's going to be structured from the HTML, because you must not structure. If you don't structure your page correctly, it will not work. So this is the box. This is the box, which is this entire white stuff. But inside the box, you have two groups there. The group for this content here and the group for this image here. So the one that have this black color here, let me change it to blue color, because you must group your content correctly. If you don't group it correctly, flex will not work. Don't forget, flex work based on the container and items. So this blue now is the container, and once you display this blue as a flex, it will place this one on the left, it will place this one on the right, and as you can see, there is space there, so you can use gap to force that space if there is no space in the parent. But if there is space in the parent, you can use your justify content and so forth like that. But inside this one too, even if I want to do this one too, I will still display this one too as flex, because I can see that a lot of things here are stacked on top of each other and they are being arranged. You are going to see how all these things are being done when we are working on all these design, but you must know how to lay out, because that's the first thing. Even here too, if I want to lay out all this thing, it's still flex here. A lot of design you'll be working on, they are based on flex layout. So this is the container here. So this container, inside it, you have this section here, and apart from that, you have this other section that is holding all this one. But inside this top too, it's still subdivided again into this and this one here, because they are separate. And inside this top one too, this is another group again, and that's what you'll be doing. You always be grouping things based on the way you want to use your flex property to apply all this functionality there, because if you don't arrange it correctly, it will not work. Your flex will just be doing something else, and that's this why I have to explain what is flex container and what is flex item. You must arrange this thing in a way that you are having container and you are having item, and whatever you are doing with the container, it will only affect the item that is inside it, not any other thing there. So, and that's how the flex property work, and that's what we're using to do a lot of design that you are seeing here. What you always be doing, look at here too. So there's a container here. So if I want to do this one now, we are going to have a container. This is how it works here too, because you must know how the layout works. If you want to work on this section, this is a section, this is another section here, this is the header section. But if you look at inside this header section here, you have this logo side, which is this the logo, where you have this logo, and again too, you now have this other one. You always be putting one element inside another one like that. Again, this is another container, and this is another container. Why are they like this? Is because of the flex property. Once you display this container as flex, it will put these two side by side automatically. But look at it, I have to group this the title and the text together, so that it doesn't see them as item, it will only see the one that group them as item. Don't forget, anytime you group them together, it will not see what is inside that group, it will only see the one that is grouping them. So which means it will take everything to this side and run this one too, we go to the other side. The same thing here too. You have this image by this side and this content too, you have their group. And inside this group, that's where you now have this title and you have this one. The same thing here too. That's what is going on here. That's what you always do. You always lay out your element in a way that you can place them side by side or you stack them on top of each other depending on the screen that you're working on. That's the pattern a lot of sites follows there, because there's no way you be placing things side by side on mobile. On the mobile, you always see that they are being placed. Can you see? They are now being placed on top of each other on the mobile, but on the desktop, they are always going to be side by side because you have a lot of space. Since you have a lot of space, you just put them. And with the help of flex property, you can quickly switch from row to column or from column to row based on the screen that you are working with. And as you can see here, the image is at the top, the content is down. But once it's on the desktop, they are now side by side, which is easy to do. I like it's easy. You can do this easily using your flex property. Where is the video? I don't want this thing to be more than this. 130. No. Let me stop.